Tonight, before you go to sleep, notice how many tiny reserves stand between you and panic. The battery icon on your phone, the fuel left in the car, the bottle on the nightstand. Most of the time, you barely think about them. But let one of them dip too low, and something old wakes up inside you. You start checking, rechecking, calculating. Now remove the charger, the gas station, the tap, the weather app. Strip the world back to heat, distance, memory, and one question that decides whether your family sees tomorrow. In a landscape that looks empty, how did ancient humans find water no one could see? The first surprise is that the best desert travelers were probably not searching for water in the way we imagine. They were reducing uncertainty. They moved through remembered networks of springs, rock holes, seasonal basins, soakages, and channels that only made sense if you had learned the land for years. In northern Arabia, archaeologists have found evidence of highly mobile people moving among seasonal water bodies around 12,000 years ago, leaving camps and monumental rock art along corridors shaped by water that appeared and vanished with the climate. The point is not that they wandered until they got lucky. The point is that they learned to read an invisible system beneath the surface. And that mattered because the real danger was not thirst alone. It was the shrinking number of good options. A group could leave a known source feeling confident long before anyone was in crisis. But each step cost water. Each hour cost range. Each wrong turn consumed the very reserve needed to reverse the mistake. Heat made the problem crueler. Human bodies are extraordinary endurance machines because we sweat so well, but that gift spends water in exchange for movement. Reviews of heat and cognition suggest the mental effects are real but nuanced, varying with severity, temperature, acclimatization, and task. Which means ancient survival was not about superhuman toughness. It was about refusing to let the body reach the point where judgment began to fray. That is why the desert's emptiness is partly an illusion. Over the last 800,000 years, the Sahara repeatedly shifted between harsher and greener worlds, with humid periods that supported rivers, lakes, and vegetation where there is now hyper-arid ground. Arabia, too, opened and closed with climate, creating temporary corridors for movement and life. So when archaeologists find artifacts clustered around dry basins or occupation traces near vanished shorelines, they are not finding random camps in dead space. They are finding the footprints of knowledge around lost water. The landscape changed. The logic did not. Human beings kept building their lives around what the ground could hold for however long it could hold it. Picture this. You wake before sunrise because the cool hours are worth more than comfort. The container feels heavier now than it will at noon. A child points to a ridge and smiles because that hill is familiar. By late morning, conversation gets shorter. People begin checking the world against memory. The ridge should have appeared by now. The channel should bend here. Tracks should be fresher. This is what most of us miss when we imagine finding water. The search was not one heroic moment. It was a long chain of predictions. And the first sign of danger may not have been a dry mouth. It may have been a landmark arriving late. So what did they actually look for? Not one magic sign, not a mythic instinct. More often, a stack of weak clues that became meaningful only when they agreed. A line of tougher vegetation following a buried drainage, animal tracks converging, but not too old. Insects where there should be none, cooler sediment beneath the crust, a shaded rock face marked by past flow. Or just as important, the opposite. No fresh dung, no bird activity, no change in soil, no reason to trust the place today simply because it worked last season. Real expertise is like that. Less like certainty, more like disciplined doubt. Ancient travelers probably survived because they knew when a clue was merely interesting, and when several clues together became a decision. Ethnographic records from Australian deserts preserve that same principle in a different world, with different languages, different rules, different places. Water was never just over there. It existed in locally specific forms. Rivers, water holes, wetlands, rock holes, hidden seepages, soakages dug into sand, and sources embedded in story, route, and responsibility. Official Australian heritage research emphasizes how central water was not only to survival, but to songs, memory, and social life. Other reviews of Aboriginal desert knowledge describe flooded gnamas, soakage wells, clay dams, tree and root waters, and channel-based sources that outsiders would pass without understanding. That matters because there was no universal desert trick. The sign had to belong to that landscape, and no one person needed to hold the whole map. That may be the most human part of the story. A skilled traveler might know the distant corridor. An elder might remember what happened during a rare drought. A gatherer might recognize which plant meant useful moisture and which one meant nothing. A visitor might bring news of rain beyond the horizon. Children in hunter-gatherer societies often acquire knowledge through participation, observation, play, and being allowed near real work long before formal instruction ever enters the picture. Around fires, people do more than entertain each other. They preserve dangers, routes, judgments, failures. The group itself becomes a memory system. The map lives between minds. Then comes another misconception we inherit from archaeology, that technology begins when stone or timber survives. It doesn't. Technology begins the moment humans learn to change future possibilities. Digging a hidden seep, clearing a muddy source, covering it from animals, carrying water away from the crowd, leaving early because timing is a tool. Mobile containers may have been among the most transformative technologies humans ever invented, even though organic bags, slings, baskets, bark vessels, and skins almost never preserve well. The hard evidence is thin, partly because the materials disappear, not because the idea was trivial. A container lets you carry part of an environment with you. It turns a place into a reserve. It gives your species a longer shadow. And if that sounds ancient, notice how familiar it still feels. Your brain still carries this program. This is why a full fuel tank can calm you before you drive anywhere. Why a visible backup battery feels safer than a promise. Why people check supplies during storms or feel irrationally exposed when GPS fails in a place they do not know. The object changed. The logic didn't. Our ancestors lived in a world where security meant confidence in future access. Not ownership in the abstract. Not wealth on paper. Access. To water, to shade, to the next known place. That old system still shapes how we trust, hoard, share, worry, and relax. It also explains something less flattering. We romanticize persistence. But in a desert, the refusal to update can kill you. The strongest leader is not the one who never doubts. It is the one who notices reality shifting sooner than pride does. A remembered source may fail. A season may break pattern. A route may remain correct and still become dangerous. Ancient intelligence was not mystical certainty. It was error correction. It was the ability to let the landscape overrule memory, to let newer evidence overrule confidence, to turn back before courage became stupidity. So maybe the deepest sophistication of ancient humans was not that they could find hidden water. It was that they created an invisible infrastructure before pipes, pumps, reservoirs, or maps on screens. Memory was infrastructure. Story was infrastructure. Trust was infrastructure. Place names were compressed data. Social ties were survival insurance. A child learning a route was as important, in its own way, as a later engineer lining a well with timber. Civilization did not invent this intelligence. It inherited it, expanded it, buried it inside systems so reliable that most of us no longer notice what we depend on. And that may be why this subject feels strangely personal. If the tap failed tomorrow, if the roads vanished, if the glowing icons went dark, many of us would look at an empty desert and see nothing. Ancient people looked at that same apparent emptiness and saw probabilities, warnings, memory, and maybe a path. Not because they were closer to nature in some poetic sense, but because they understood a truth we keep trying to forget. Survival has never depended on seeing everything clearly. It depends on learning how to read what is hidden. And somewhere under all our modern comforts, your body still remembers that the world is safest when the unseen structure beneath it makes sense.